My name is Mark Ellison. I'm a professor of ancient scripture in the Department of Religious Education at BYU. I study early Christianity and teach classes on New Testament and other books of scripture in the LDS canon. Right, well, in March, on March 12th of 2020, the church announced that all meetings for the foreseeable future were going to be canceled. And the very next day, the federal government announced a state of emergency. And so that timeline is kind of interesting. And I don't know if we ought to read too much into that, but maybe it suggests, if nothing else, that the church was leading out on this, and the church's measures were not just in response to the federal government, but church leaders were proactively thinking about, here are some things we need to do for the safety of our own community. Right away, the church started implementing some policy changes. In April of 2020, the church announced under the headline, First Presidency provides guidance on how to administer the church in challenging times, and announced all kinds of possible policy changes or adaptations that we could make in the era of pandemic, including really interesting things like church leaders who needed to be present to witness the performance of an ordinance could maybe tune in via technology and witness it in that way. And so we started implementing all kinds of adaptations right away. In July of 2020, the Utah Area Presidency issued a statement on mask wearing for members in Utah. Here's a quote from that. They said, "We ask all Latter-day Saints in the Utah area to be good citizens by wearing face coverings when in public." January of 2021, the First Presidency and every apostle over 70 was vaccinated. And President Ellison, some of you might know, issued a tweet telling about his experience, and he said, "Receiving the vaccine today was part of our personal efforts to be good global citizens and helping to eliminate COVID-19 from the world." The church has done a great deal of humanitarian work in the COVID-19 pandemic to help communities that were really hit hard. And the church recently announced that the April 2021 General Conference would be virtual, the third consecutive General Conference that wouldn't meet in person. I am really grateful for scripture, for history, for religious teachings that can help guide all of us and have certainly helped guide me in navigating this really unusual, difficult year. I'm a student of Christian history. I study ancient Christianity. That's where I research and publish. And it's really interesting because when you study history, you get a sense of proportion. You get a sense that things recur, and things have not always been as they are now, and yet patterns recur in human history. Christians have faced times of global pandemic in the past. And in the 3rd century, especially in the middle of the 3rd century, there was a plague called the Plague of Cyprian. Modern medical doctors aren't quite sure what this was. It might have been some kind of hemorrhagic fever, but it took countless lives over a period of a couple decades in the mid-3rd century. And during this time, historical records talk about the actions of Christians as they cared for each other, as they were very unselfish. Their unselfishness became legendary, and it contributed to a rise in the level of esteem that people in society had for Christians in general, and may have contributed to the growth of Christianity, which grew really dramatically in the latter half of the 3rd century. So historians and social scientists have studied that and have thought that the way Christians unselfishly applied their beliefs and cared for each other at this time had a lasting effect on religious history and on their own community. Some of the teachings that they were guided by are some of the same teachings that I feel guided by. So one of the teachings that has meant a lot to me is in Matthew 25, Jesus tells the parable of the sheep and the goats. And this is the climactic last parable in the climactic last sermon that Jesus teaches in Matthew. And it's all about how we're going to be judged when everything's said and done. And it's so interesting, out of all the things Jesus said that we could be judged on, he doesn't mention things like saving ordinances or the commandments we obeyed or disobeyed, but it all hinges on love. And this is where the famous statement, if you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. If you have not done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was imprisoned and you came and visited me, etc. And what Jesus seems to be saying to his followers there is, how have you treated the most vulnerable among you? And in our own moment of pandemic, as I think of the things that we've been asked to do, that teaching has guided me. How will my actions demonstrate that I am concerned about the needs of the most vulnerable in our society? And so doing little things like wearing a mask, social distancing, and so forth, if that can be a sign of Christ-like love, doing unto others as we would be done by, those kinds of things, that's been really empowering to me. Some other things, Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians 8 that even if you have a right to do something, in his context, he's talking about a right to eat meat that's sold in the marketplaces. If it might cause someone else difficulty, if it might cause someone else to stumble, maybe forego that right in the interest of a greater good. And so that too has informed my decision-making, and when it comes to things like wearing masks and distancing and so forth. Other teachings as well, like in 2 Kings chapter 5, the story of Naaman the Syrian. Naaman's servant says, Naaman, if the prophet had asked you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have done that? How much more when he asked you to do some little thing like bathe in the river and then be healed? And again, such a little thing. To wear a mask, social distance, it's inconvenient, yes, it's difficult and lonely sometimes, yes, but if it can cause a greater good, how much more? And so those are some of the main teachings that have guided me. I think as someone who aspires to be a follower of Jesus Christ, his teaching to the disciples on his last night of life, by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one to another. That maybe most of all has impelled me to do all I can to comply with the kind of guidance we've been given by experts.